Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, Tomcat Stitchery. I'm Whitney and today we've got the last of our Kimberly Sew Along. So we've been sewing through the Kimberly. We've been making two versions, one with the standard V-neck version without a sleeve and one where we drafted our own scoop neck version and then went ahead and added the sleeve. We've also foregone the facings that go with the pattern and have done fully lined bodices on both. So today we are adding the skirt. This is the same, we did the two different weeks of bodices. Today it is the same from here on out for both dresses. We are adding, we're sewing the skirt up and then adding it to the bodice and then finishing things up. So if you stay tuned till the end of this, you'll see I'll do some twirls in both dresses. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this one. I haven't decided yet next week if I'm gonna do a tutorial week and then jump into swimsuit sewing, but we'll be making this swimsuit pattern. I can't remember the number off the top of my head. It's this butterick pattern right here, this Lisette butterick pattern that is out of print right now, but you can find it pretty easily on Etsy and other sites. I had mentioned I was going to do it last year and didn't, so since so many people had already purchased the pattern, I thought I'd go ahead and just, everything I'm covering with this sew along can be easily transferred to any swimsuit pattern, but that's the one that I'll be sewing with. So yeah, so I don't know if that'll start next week or maybe one more week, if I'll do a tutorial next week. I haven't quite decided yet. All right, I hope you guys enjoy this last piece of the sew along. As always, leave questions down below if you have any. And if you do enjoy this content and found it very helpful, I do have a Ko-fi account linked down below, which is kind of like a virtual tip jar. No pressure, but if you would like to leave a tip, you can do so through there. Okay, I hope you guys have a good one, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Okay, so today we're going to finish up our dresses. Now, both dresses finish off the same way. I'll be using the red one to show you, but they both finish off the same way. So we're the same here on out. So the pieces you're going to need are your pocket piece. And again, I changed up the pocket a little bit. I literally just extended it into the waistline. But you'll have 4 of your pocket pieces, and I've gone ahead and I've serged around just the curved edge of all 4 of these pieces. So you'll need to do that. Serge around all 4 edges. Where's my other one? Of all 4. You don't need to serge the straight edge here. That's going to get serged at a later point, but you do need to serge just around these curved edges on all 4 of your pocket pieces. So you've got those. And then we've got our front that is cut on the fold. And it is, nothing should be serged on this yet. And we'll get that way in a minute. But there's our front. Make sure you mark your pocket notches here. That's going to be an important thing to know here in a little bit. And then you should have 2 of your backs. Also make sure your pocket notches are marked and your zipper notch. Although the zipper notch here I find a little arbitrary just because, and I'll show you when we insert our zippers. It's nice to know this so you kind of know-ish where the depth of your zipper, but I'll show you when I'm inserting the zipper. I use this just kind of as a general guideline. I don't really match anything totally up with that, but that is nice to know because on our back skirt pieces, I have gone ahead and serged the whole center back seam. And when I'm serging my skirt pieces, I'm always starting at the hem and serging up. That helps to keep things from stretching out. Now, center back of this skirt is on straight of grain, so you shouldn't have that issue anyway, but just as a good practice, start at the hem and serge your way up. And then on the wrong side, I've gone ahead and fused a 1 1/4 inch wide knit fusible interfacing or stay tape here for the zipper. And I talked about that last week in the video. Of where, because I put this same stuff into the whole center back of the bodice. But this product is linked down in the description box below. It is the So Keezy tape. And I put that on both sides of the skirt back. Okay, so once we've got all of those ready to go, this is what we're going to do first. I'll show you first on the back pieces because we got them here. So right sides up. Right sides up, we've got our center back seams here in the center. We're going to sew our pockets, and we're going to sew those right sides together and you're gonna match up your notch on your pocket to the notch here, and then the second notch for your pocket is where the bottom of the pocket should meet. This is stretched out a little bit, so I am gonna sew from the bottom of the pocket up. So we are going to do this, and I'll show that when we're actually over there sewing. But I'm gonna go ahead and sew one pocket piece on each sides of the back, and then the second two pocket pieces are gonna get sewn the same way on the skirt front. I'm gonna sew these in at 3/8 of an inch. So we're gonna go ahead and do that, and then we will serge these side seams and then understitch. But yeah, so first things first, we're going to sew our pocket pieces to our side seams. So you should have 4, 2 backs, 2 fronts. And again, I'm gonna start from the bottom of the pocket and go up, and we're sewing it at 3/8 of an inch. So let's go over to the sewing machine and take care of that. Okay, so like I mentioned before, we're gonna sew all of our pocket pieces right sides together. I'm gonna match up the notch that's on our pocket with the notch here at the skirt, and then I'm gonna match the bottom of the pocket with the bottom notch on the skirt. And the skirt side seams, it's been sitting for a little bit, and sometimes things can grow. And I think I mentioned that there is a little bit of rayon in this linen, so that can definitely be the case. But I'm just gonna start at the bottom of the pocket, and actually I'm not. Actually, I will start at the bottom of the hem and work my way up, especially when I'm serging. But actually, since this is stretched out just a little bit, I'm actually gonna sew with the skirt against the feed dogs. That will help ease that back into shape. So I'm gonna sew actually with the pocket. So it will just depend on which side I'm working on, whether or not I'm starting at the bottom or the top, obviously. But I'm gonna match my tops and then match my notches. But I'm sewing this at 3/8 of an inch because this is going to get all understitched nicely, and we want it to tuck in to the skirt. So I'm just going to match my notches and sew this pocket at the side seam to the skirt. Okay, so see, when I sew with this against the feed dogs, everything eases in just fine. All right, so I'm gonna do this to the other 3 sides, so the other back and then both sides on the front, and then I'll talk about the next step. All right, so once you have your pockets sewn to your fronts and your backs, now I'm gonna go and serge this seam, and try not to trim anything off. You can finish it however you want, I'm serging, but try not to trim anything off. We are just finishing off that seam, and definitely for serging, I'm gonna start at the hem and serge up to the waistline, so I don't accidentally stretch anything out. So I'm gonna do this to all 4 side seams separately, really quick. All right, once we have finished serging, and notice we've not pressed anything yet, and we still aren't gonna press anything. So now I'm going to flip my pocket away from the skirt, and I'm gonna understitch. So I'm pushing my seam allowance to the pocket, and I'm gonna sew on the pocket right next to the stitch line, really close, about, less than 1/8 of an inch, like a 1/16 of an inch probably, along on the pocket, sewing the seam allowance that we just formed there to the pocket. So I'm gonna do this also now on all 4 pocket pieces. All right, now all of our pieces look like they have ears. Just like that. Okay, still haven't pressed anything. We will get to that in just a moment. All right, once you have done that, now we are going to sew our pockets together. So I'm gonna place, do this one first. So I'm gonna place one back on top of one front, right sides together. And I am just going to sew, so you see the pocket piece here. I'm just gonna sew from the top of the pocket down around, and then when I get down here where it attaches to the skirt, we are at 5/8 of an inch is our seam allowance, so I'm gonna keep sewing until I've gone just right past the serging line basically, just a little bit past that, and then I will backstitch. So I'm gonna do this on both sides. So just the curved edge. This top edge is still free, and we haven't sewn the side seams together yet. So I'm just starting at the top of the pocket. We will sew around the curve, and then we'll sew into the skirt right past this seam allowance about 1/8 of an inch. Not 1/8, about 1/4 of an inch, to where it, about hits that 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so I'm gonna do that on both skirt sides. All right, so once we have our pockets all nice and sewn, now we're gonna sew our side seams. So you should have, I can see it here, maybe you can't as well, but there is a notch right here. So this is, here's my pocket up here, and this is my side seam, and I can see my notch here. So basically what I'm doing is I'm going to start at the top of the side seam. Actually, what would be best is to let's start at the bottom. Start at the bottom and sew 5/8 of an inch up to the bottom of the pocket, and just make sure you crisscross that area where you came through. I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. That 5/8 of an inch, just make sure you crisscross up to that point, and then backstitch there a couple of times to make it nice and stable. And then we're going to come up here to where that notch is. You'll make sure you can see it. And starting at 5/8 of an inch in, which will be 1/4 of an inch in from your serging line. And actually the side of my presser foot's 1/4 of an inch, which makes it really easy. I just line up the side of my presser foot to the edge of the serging. But we're gonna start here at this notch, double stitch or backstitch a couple of times, and then sew all the way up to the top of the skirt. So if you can see, here's our pocket. Our pocket's still gonna stick out. We're sewing from the notch, double stitching, and then sewing up at 5/8 of an inch from here. So hopefully that makes sense. Sorry, going in and out of focus. And then again down here, we'll be double back stitching, and then having that seam sewn too, but I'm actually gonna start at the bottom just to help with anything that might be shifting. So that should leave a nice open hole for your hand to go in for your pocket. So still haven't pressed anything. I'm gonna do this on both sides, and then I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so hopefully you can see this. So here's my side seam. Hopefully you can see that stitching, and then I get up to the pocket, and that's what it looks like at the bottom of the pocket. And then we leave a gap, and then we start sewing right here. So here's my pocket still sticking out, and then we sew up to the top. We still have not pressed anything. Now, I haven't done the other side yet, but I'm gonna do it in just a second. Now there's a couple of ways, well, let me sew the second side, and then we're going to talk about a couple of different options for pressing. All right, so both my sides are done now. So there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. Now, you want your pocket to go to the front, and we're actually going to base that in place here in just a second. But you can clip the back seam allowance, which is this one right here, which would be the seam allowance facing you. You can clip that and then be able to press your seam allowance open from the pocket down, and then everything up here with the pocket all gets pressed to the front of the skirt. That's definitely an option, and there's a lot of patterns that have instructions to do that. I hate clipping into my seam allowances like that, especially when they're not covered with a lining. I just find that they're just really a weak point. So what I do instead is I just press all of my seam allowance to the front of the skirt. So I'm gonna do that on both sides, but before I do that, we're gonna base the top of the pocket in place. So if you look at the skirt here, this is the front, this is the back. Obviously, this is the wrong side of the skirt because the pocket's here. You're gonna push all the bulk to the front, and I'm just gonna stitch this top part to the waist seam at 3/8 of an inch on both sides. So I'm stitching them to the front of the skirt. Okay, once those are basted to the front of the skirt, now I'm gonna go and I'm gonna press, this is the first time I'm pressing, I'm gonna press my seam allowances all to the front, including below the pocket, because I don't want to clip into anything. So I'm gonna give everything a nice press from both the wrong side and the right side to make sure my seam looks really good. But I'm gonna press everything to the front, and then we'll come back and attach our bodice. All right, so everything is really nicely pressed. I've got, you know, my side seams right here. The pocket is nice and hidden in there. Yeah, but I find that waiting until that step to do all the pressing, it saves time, number one, and then you still can get some really good results because everything is, you don't accidentally press something open too much, especially when it comes to the pocket. Everything's kind of in place, and so it just presses a lot easier and a lot neater. So, pockets are in, skirt is done, except for the back. Now we're going to attach our skirt to our bodice. So I have our bodice here that we finished last week, or not finished, but you know, pretty much, I mean, got to the point that it's at. All right, so we are going to attach the skirt to the bodice. Basically, we're going to pull our lining out of the way at this point. This is very simple. We are just going to match up our side seams, match up center front. Everything should fit nice and easily together. Pins. So we are just sewing the main bodice to the skirt. So the lining is not getting sewn to anything right now. So just kind of peel it up and out of the way. And then there's my interfaced strip on the bodice. And I also want to point out that at center back, our bodice, the center back seam is not serged, and that's okay because that's going to get tucked into the lining, but the skirt center back seam should be. That was something I showed there at the beginning before we got started, but that should be serged because that does not have a lining. In this version anyway. All right, so now what I'm gonna do, I just like to pinpoint a few key places. So the side seams and center front and then the back. I'm actually gonna sew with the bodice up and the skirt down because I feel like my skirt waist is stretched just a wee bit. So that will help me ease it all back in. And I have quite a bit more darts too that I want to make sure don't get flipped while I'm sewing on the bodice. So I'm going to sew at 5/8 of an inch from one center back seam to the next, sewing my bodice, just the main fabric of the bodice, to the skirt. All right, making sure there's nothing pinched. I think we're good. Everything looks good. Okay, bodice and skirt are now attached at the waist seam. So now I'm going to go to the ironing board, and I'm going to press this seam, this waist seam, up towards the bodice. So I'm gonna go do that, and then we are getting very close to zipper insertion. So we're almost there, guys. Okay, I'm gonna do that real quick. All right, so this is a, we're gonna put our zipper in basically, and this is a trick that I actually learned from Mimi G. I think it's not necessarily her trick. I think maybe even she said she learned it from Kenneth King. I think a lot of people do this, but it was, when I saw her do it, I was like, oh my gosh, that's fantastic. So here I've got my dress. This is obviously the back, center back seam. I've got my interfacing fused to center back seam on either side. I have my lining pulled out of the way. I have my invisible zipper here, and I've actually gone through and pressed my zipper teeth. I've kind of pressed that groove there for the invisible zipper. I've pressed it. And don't hold your iron on there too. I mean, you can melt the nylon teeth. But just kind of run your iron quickly right along that groove and kind of press it flat so that when you have your zipper zipped up, it stands like a tent like that instead of flat. That's a Sandra Betsina trick. And it just helps, I find, to get a really good finish on your invisible zipper. So anyway, that is tip number 1. So number 2, first thing we want to do, number 1, I said that our notch down here was kind of a guideline-ish, really more of a guideline for where to put the interfacing. But here's my notch right here, and we get pretty close to it. But what I want to do is I'm just going to lay my zipper, I'm going to everything nice and straight. And I want my zipper to go off the top of the dress. It just makes a much neater, nicer finish. I'm basically right now going to mark where I'm going to stop sewing my zipper. And I am using a navy blue invisible zipper in this dress. I don't have a red one. So there you go. But I'm going to mark everything laid out pretty nice and neat here, just where I want to stop sewing here at the bottom of the zipper. So here is right where the pull stops. So I'm just going to put a mark here with a friction pin actually. So this is where I want to stop sewing my basting stitch basically. So this is going to be the bottom of my zipper. So now I'm going to go to the sewing machine and I'm going to put right sides together. You know, match up my waist seam really nicely. And I am going to baste from the top of the dress with a nice long stitch. I'm going to baste all the way till I get to this point that I marked. And I'm going to back stitch really well, and then I'm going to switch to a regular stitch length, back stitch again really well, and sew with a regular stitch length from that point to the bottom of the skirt. So let's go back to the sewing machine, and we're going to do that really quickly. Okay, so let's sew that basting. I find when you have to, I just love this technique because when you're trying to match up like waist seams and that kind of stuff, it makes it so much easier, and you don't get the little pucker, the little divot that you sometimes get at the bottom of invisible zippers. So I'm really just pinning that waist seam. But again, I am starting at the top. And I am going to back stitch even with my basting stitch just so it doesn't come out. But I'm going to start sewing at the top with a basting stitch at 5/8 of an inch. Okay, so I sewed with the basting stitch all the way to this mark that I made right here, and I've back stitched. Now I'm going to switch it back to my regular stitch length, which I'm sewing at a 2.5. And I'm going to start right at that point and back stitch really well right where I marked. And now I'm going to sew from this point all the way down to the hem of the skirt. And I didn't start at the hem and sew up on this one because center back seam should be on straight of grain, so you shouldn't have any issue with anything stretching. All right, so we've basted from the top all the way to where we marked the end of our zipper, right there, which is where we want the end of the zipper to be. It's close to that notch. And then I backstitched and then switched to my 2.5 stitch length, backstitched again, and sewn all the way to the back to the hem of the skirt. So now I'm going to go to the sewing machine, the ironing board, and press this seam open. Okay, so once you've pressed everything open, you can go back and check your waist seam. Now look, my waist seam jogged a little bit. So you can decide, does that bother me enough to fix it? If it does, just unpick like from here to here, and this is a basting stitch, so it comes out really easily, and then just rebaste it, you know, jog it a little bit and rebaste it. And I'm going to admit that usually when things are off by that small of amount, I don't usually go back and fix, but for the sake of teaching, I will. So I'm literally just cutting 2 stitches on either side there. And again, because it's basted, it just comes right out. So I've gone about, I don't know, 1.5 inches on either side. Of the seam. And then I can match those up a little bit better. I'm actually going to put 2 pins in on either side of that, just so nothing shifts. So I will have to go back, that should be much better, back to my basting stitch. You don't want to accidentally sew that at your regular stitch because that'll be much harder to get open. So I'm just going to fix that really quickly. Okay. All right, now it's perfect. And I will admit that that does feel good. Okay, so now we're going to insert our zipper, and I'm actually going to take you in front of me to show you. Basically the idea is we are going to baste this in place onto the seam allowance, then we will cut our basting stitches, and then we will sew it in with a regular, I'm using a regular stitch length for all of this, but in essence, we're basting it in first. We just don't remove those stitches. And then we will go sew it in with an actual zipper, visible zipper foot, and make everything look all nice and neat. Okay. All right, just getting that lined up. Okay, so zip up your zipper, and we are going to be, well, I'll pull you in front of me and show you what we're doing. Okay. Okay, so this is the first time I put in an invisible zipper with a tripod in my lap, so you're gonna have to bear with me. Alrighty, so if you look on this side of the skirt, you can see where I backstitched and switched from my basting stitch to my regular stitch. That's where we want the end of our zipper, so the zipper stop on here, which is right, you can kind of see right there. I want that to line up with that. So I just want to make sure that my zipper stop is not stopping still in the basting area, because that could be a problem. If anything, you want it, you know, air on the side of it being below. All right, so I'm just gonna line that up there. You can pop a pin in there if you want. Maybe I will, just so I don't have to readjust it. Okay, so basically we are lining up, hopefully you can see that okay. We are lining up the zipper tape with our seam line, and it's a little low. And the right side of my zipper is facing down, so I'm gonna line up, I'm just gonna do this, line up my, as best, you know, it doesn't have to be perfect, and I'll show you why in a second, but we're just kind of basically making sure that the zipper teeth are right over that seam that is basted shut. Now I'm just going to pin these in just for a second because I got to change the foot on my machine. Now this is where we get into a lot of switching the feet around. So right now I have a regular zipper foot on my machine. This zipper tape is only 3/8 of an inch wide, and this really pushes it over and makes it really hard. So I'm going to put a standard zipper foot on, which I have to find. There's my invisible one. Now my machine, I will show you, comes with a few different zipper feet. Well, I bought a few different. So I'm going to show you these. Okay, so my machine, it has a zipper foot, so I can't move my needle position on my machine. So I have a zipper foot like this, where the needle allows you to line up to the right side of whatever you're lining up. And then I've got one that does the same thing on the left side. I just find that I don't get enough pressure on these and my bobbin thread gets really loopy. I'm not crazy about these 2 feet. However, this one, which is just a super skinny foot, is my favorite zipper foot. This is the one I like to use the most. And then eventually we'll be using our invisible zipper foot. Obviously these could look different for all machines. There's just a single hole, and then it's got these grooves in the bottom that you run the zipper teeth in. It makes sewing in an invisible zipper a breeze. And you can buy those for home machines as well. But first, I'm going to take off my regular, literally for almost the rest of the sewing of this dress, we are just going back and forth between feet, which can be a little annoying when you have to unscrew them like I do, but that's okay. I have to do this anytime a zipper goes in. All right, so we are putting the zipper foot in, and I mean, if you've got a really skinny regular presser foot, you may not have to do this step. I've just found that mine pushes the tape, or the tape of the zipper, funky, and I don't get a good finish. Okay, so now I've got my zipper foot on. So now we are going to take, so here's our dress, and we've got, of course, our zipper, or our seam allowance press open. I'm going to start at one side, and I'm pushing the dress out of the way. Pushing the dress out of the way, so I'm just working on this one seam allowance. I'm not doing any pinning other than this pin right here, just because I didn't want to have to refind it again. But I'm going to start at the, no, just right at the base, really, of this zipper tape. And I'm just going to line up this zipper foot right to the teeth. I don't have to get super close on this because, like I said, this is basically you're basting the zipper in, except we're just not going to undo these stitches. So I'm just going to basically make sure that I'm laying the zipper teeth over that seam allowance. Oops, I'm still on basting. That's the other thing, got to make sure your stitch length is correct because you're going back and forth a little bit here. So I'm just going to sew this in, and I am lining this up. Lining this up over, I'm paying more attention to make sure that I've got the zipper teeth lined as much as possible over that seam line. And make sure you're not getting anything tucked underneath. You only should have the one side of the seam allowance here. And it doesn't have to be precise because we will get it sewn in really precise here soon. And we don't pin for this because pins can distort a zipper so bad. Try not to use any pins when you are putting in a zipper because they just distort things and then you hardly ever get a good finish. If you really want something to kind of anchor things down, I recommend using like a double-sided sticky tape, you know, like a Wonder Under or something like that, like the 1/4 inch Steam-A-Seam, that kind of stuff. Okay, now I'm literally, this is the other beauty of this, because we have basted that seam closed, now I'm starting at the top of the zipper, and I'm going to baste down the other side. So now I've got the other seam allowance. That's the only thing that's underneath me right now. And now we're going to sew it to the other side. This is much easier because you're literally just sewing it down. Riding that zipper foot right along the zipper teeth. Making sure everything's pretty flat there. Okay, so now that that is basted in, we want to flip everything to the right side. I'm just going to keep you in my lap here because this is easier said than done with a camera in your lap. Okay, so once this is all put in like that, I'm now going to go through and unpick those basting stitches. So you may want to kind of go back and forth, especially here at the bottom. So here is the base of the skirt right here, or the where my zipper ends-ish. So I'm just going to kind of look here and see where those basting stitches, sorry, it's super dark under here. So there's where my basting stitches started and stopped right there. So I'm going to start unpicking about right there. And these should come out really easily because they're basting stitches. Now, I am just going to now unpick from that point. Oops, just unthreaded my machine. I'll rethread that. I'm just going to unpick from this point all the way to the top of the dress. All right, so once you've unpicked everything, this looks like the world's worst invisible zipper install. That's okay. Look at that seam line, all nice and that's what it's supposed to look like right now. That's okay. So I've got it all nice and unpicked, all those basting stitches pulled. You may need to go and pull out any stray pieces, hit it with the lint roller, whatever you need to do. All right, so now we're going to go back inside the dress, so we're going to turn it inside out again. All right. So as soon as we've got everything turned inside out again, my lining is just pulled out of the way for right now. All right, so we've had the zipper zipped up until this point. Now we can unzip it. So I'm going to unzip it because we need this open now. So I'm unzipping it all the way. And then when I get to this point where I can't go any further, I'm actually going to, this is where a hemostat actually comes in really handy. I need to order one of those. It's like a surgical tool that grips onto things and makes this really easy. But we're going to work this down basically below where we've sewn. There we go. There we go. So so my zipper is, the zipper pull is down below where we've stopped sewing, because there's where we stopped sewing right there. So that'll, obviously be fixed in a second. So now I have switched to my invisible zipper foot. I've rethreaded my machine. But keep your regular zipper foot out because that gets put back on here in just a second. Like I said, it's like a game. Now I like to start at the top of my invisible zippers and work my way down to where I'm going to stop. So that's what I'm going to do on either side. So I am opening this up and I'm pulling my teeth out of the way. It's all basted in. I'm putting the teeth into the far left groove here of this invisible zipper foot, and now it's just a matter of sewing all the way down. And because we pressed that, this just sews in so easily. I want to get any fraying fabric out of the way there. Now I do still use my finger to kind of roll that zipper tape out of the way, just to make sure it gets nice and close. But really, these invisible zipper feet are pretty amazing for all brands. All right, and then when I get down here, just should have that one seam allowance out there. When I get to the where I can't go anymore, I backstitch. Okay, now I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. This time, we've got everything to the right. It helps to have a nice big throat plate. So this time I'm putting it into the right-hand side groove, because again, I can't move my needle on my machine. But this makes this kind of basting in first technique really helps with this. You don't get anything, you know, easing in at different speeds or anything like that. It just goes in really nice. It makes it much easier to line up your seam lines. And again, I'm pulling that out of the way. And then when I get down here to the pull, that's when I backstitch. Okay, so now, now you are going to, let there be light. You do have to kind of mess with the pull down here just to kind of get it to pull up, because you've got, you know, the seam is sewn right there. So you just kind of mess with the foot, or the pull. Eventually, again, this is where a hemostat would come in well, because you could really grip the pull. I'm also going to clip that extra thread. Invisible zippers do not like any extra threads. Anything that gets stuck in their track does not make them happy. There we go. All right, so now I'm free. Look at the base of that zipper. See, no weird puckers. It just went in beautifully. I do have a little bit of thread that still needs to come out from the basting, which I will clean that up and cut that in a minute. But look how nice that transition is. And then if we zip it up, hold on, everything's inside out. If we zip that up really nicely, you see that our join there at our waist seam is beautiful. And look at that invisible zipper. I mean, it's completely invisible. It's just gorgeous. So that is why that is my new favorite way to insert an invisible zipper. Okay, now we need to sew in our lining. So go ahead and take the invisible zipper foot off and put the regular zipper foot back on. All right, so now I have my dress inside out again. Here's my lining, and you only need to unzip at this point. You just need to unzip below the waist seam. You don't have to like unzip it a ton, just enough that you just want to be below this waist seam. So I've got that. Here's my lining. If we look up here, let's get reoriented with what we got going on here. So here our zipper is in. We still have this gap where the lining, oh, sorry about that. My sewing room's right below our hose, and my husband's outside watering flowers or something. So we still have this gap, and this gap is going to stay for just a wee bit longer. But this is the right side of our lining, obviously, against the wrong side of our bodice on both sides. So now what we're going to do is attach the bodice to the zipper tape. We will have to hand sew the lining to the waist seam at the end, but we need to finish off this seam and then finish off our next seam. So what we are going to do, let me turn this upside down here. We need to sew right sides together. So this is why we leave this gap up here. So our zipper, when it gets zipped up, you know, folds in like this. We want to open that up, and then we're going to take our lining and pull it right sides together. So it gets kind of pulled around weird. And we are going to line this up, and I hesitate to pin anything just because pins throw off zippers so badly. But there, we're going to line that up all the way down to the waist seam, which is down here. And then when you have lined that up, you want to fold 5/8 of an inch of your lining bodice up. And this is the wrong side now that's facing up. And we're going to line that right up at that waist seam. Okay, just like that. I mean, you can pop a pin there at the bottom just to keep that folded. That's okay. Okay, so what we're going to do, so no, and again, we've flipped our lining, remember. So I'm going to sew with my, oh, darn it, hold on, I keep unthreading my machine accidentally. Oh, for Pete's sake. Okay, so again, our lining, we flipped over again so that it's right sides together, and we've opened up that zipper. So I'm just going to start sewing at the top, and this is very similar to when we were basting the invisible zipper in. We still have a hole here, don't worry about that, we'll close that up in a minute. So we're just going to start here at the top, and I'm just going to follow that zipper, the right or the left, good gracious, the left side of my zipper foot. I can feel the ridge of the zipper. I'm just following right along the side there. And I am sewing the lining to the bodice there. You get so much bulk. Oh, for heaven's sake. Okay, so I kind of got a little far here, mostly because I was fighting bulk. I'm just gonna go sew that a little closer and make sure I'm writing right along that zipper tape. There we go. That's much better. So yeah, make sure you definitely have caught enough of your lining. Okay, so that when we turn this right side out, and we still have a lot of zipper on the top, that's okay. But when we turn this right side out, look how lovely that looks. Okay, so don't turn it right side out yet. You want to do your other side, and actually we're going to close up the top. I just wanted to show you what that looks like. I mean, you can go and check and make sure everything looks good, and it does. I'm very happy with that all on the zipper tape. So I'm just going to do that to the second side, and then we're going to come back and close up our top. Okay, so when we have both linings right sides together sewn, you'll notice that up here, this is where we sewed our neckline, and we stopped right there, and then we stopped understitching about an inch away from that, about right there. So what we're going to do, we still have the excess zipper tape here, that's fine, it's going to get cut off here in just a second. I'm just going to start in, so these are right sides together, and I've got my regular foot back on my machine now. Now you can sew over nylon teeth pretty easily. So I'm just going to start there at the edge, sewing at 5/8 of an inch, and back stitching there, and I'm just going to sew until I've caught up, there we go, till I've caught up to that stitch line. Sew over that a little bit, and back stitch. So now we've closed that up. So we need to do the other side. we've still got things right sides together. So on this side, I'm just going to start where I stopped. And sew off there. Okay, now we're going to clip so we can get a nice turn right here. We're just going to clip this a little bit diagonally right where we kind of have that cross, or we've crossed over here on the lining side. And then in doing that, we will chop off the excess of this zipper tape. Obviously, you want to make sure your zipper tape's open so that your pull is still connected to the zipper tape. Ask me how I know on that one. Make sure your zipper pull is in the part that you want to keep, not on the part you're cutting off. That is a horrible thing to do. And use yucky scissors. Don't use your good scissors. This will really dull them quickly. So yeah, let me go get those and I'll come back and we will clip these and turn it right side out. All right, so there's where we have finished. I'm just going to cut that off. And I've cut it kind of at an angle on both sides. Oops. Presser foot's holding that hostage. Those can get tossed. And then when we take our lining, so this is the part of the bottom part of the bodice of the lining that's not been attached down yet, and we'll turn everything right side out. You should get a really nice corner there at the top of your zipper. Do that on both sides. So then when it is all zipped up, it looks lovely. And you can go and hit and press this top edge now, but it looks beautiful from the front and from the inside as well. Okay, 2 more steps until we're done with this dress. Step number 1 is we need to do a narrow hem on the skirt. I think I mentioned I didn't have enough fabric to do the hemband that this pattern comes with. So I'm fine just doing a narrow hem. And I showed you how to do the narrow hem up close on the sleeve last week. This is the same thing, it's just a bigger circle. So I'm not gonna put you in my lap for this because I can just go quicker. And since I already showed you in my lap, I'm just turning it about 1/4 of an inch. I've got the wrong side facing up, and I've not, finished anything. I'm just folding it up about 1/4 of an inch, and I'm just sewing right in the middle of that 1/4 of an inch, really. And I'm just turning a little bit as I go, all the way around the hem of the skirt. Okay, so once I've gone around once, I've just basically got about 1/4 of an inch folded up, and this is raw. That's okay. And now I'm gonna go around again, and it folds really easily this time because it folds right where you sewed that first, it'll fold really easily where that raw edge is, I guess what I'm saying. So it's basically doubling up on itself. And this time I'm sewing right on the fold. So again, you've got 1 line of stitching on the right side, and you'll have 2 lines of stitching on the wrong side. So now I'm gonna go and give this a really good press on the ironing board. So let me go do that, and then we'll talk about the very last step. Okay, so my hem is all finished and all nice and pressed. So the very last step, if we look back here at our lining, this is all, kind of tucked in because remember we sewed we folded that up when we sewed that down. So now we're just gonna go around the whole base of the lining, and I just like to take my fingers and fold up about 5/8 of an inch. And we are going to just slip stitch that in place. So we're going to sew the lining to the seam allowance where the skirt and the bodice connect. And I'm usually just lining up that folded area to the stitch line, and then trying to slip stitch just on the inside of that stitch line so that I'm only going through the seam allowance and not through the body of the dress. So that's the very last step. Is just to hand stitch that down all the way around with a good old-fashioned slip stitch, and then we're done. So that's it with both dresses. So now I'm going to leave you with twirls of me in both dresses, so you can see the version with the scoop neck with a sleeve and the V-neck without the sleeve. I hope you've enjoyed this sew along, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!